feel bad about themselves. Well, I'm joined by David Aronovich, who writes in The Times, and by Katie Hopkins. Katie, what is it about fat people that you so hate?
I think from my pocket, I feel a deep sense of loathing for fat people in the sense that I'm paying for them. So I'm paying to solve their problems once they've become fat. I'm paying for them to have gastric bypass surgery. I'm paying for their new knees. I'm paying for their new hips or their blood pressure or their diabetes type 2. And I would always say, were I given a choice from a kind of point of scarcity that we have of resources within our NHS, as we'd all recognise, would I choose to pay for cancer treatments that some people don't have available to them because of restricted budgets, or would I pay for someone's gastric bypass? Well, I'm paying for cancer treatment every time.
But you've also said you wouldn't employ one. I mean, to what extent is it just that the way a fat person looks offends you?
No, I wouldn't say it's about the way a fat person looks. In fact, as part of my fat story in January, I just did a fat fit-off, which may not be quite appropriate for an epileptic to say. But I did a fat fit-off where a lot of fat people tell me they're fat and healthy, but as we proved during my fat fit-off, that wasn't the case. I'm actually far fitter and healthier than a fat person, and frankly I need people that can move about at speed, that can get through the city at speed, get on the underground, get on a bus, jump around, and I don't think someone who's large can actually do that.
Now, David, you have been fat. What impact would Katie's views have had on you when you were fat?
Well, I mean, by and large, I have a kind of perpetual overweight problem. I mean, because I'm greedy, I think by and large people who are overweight know that they are. I mean, some may not, and some may be harbouring delusions about it. But the thing that's interesting to me about what Katie is saying, really, is actually the psychological reasons she feels the need to feel that way. I mean, there's something deeply interesting about this reaction, because it's not actually as rational as she seems to suggest it is. I mean, we all know cases of people who are overweight who are extraordinarily world leaders. Churchill would be a kind of classic example. We know people, in fact, who are prey to a kind of series of addictions or problems and so on, who are amazing at their jobs. And if you were simply to cast them all out from your employ, if you like, then you cut yourself off from all kinds of creativity and possibilities. So it's the reasons why you personally would want to do it, and a reason why some of your readers will want to read about you doing it and so interested in it. This kind of, I don't know, punitive protectionism, as if in a way, by punishing these other people, by talking about these other people, they could keep the devil of the thing away from themselves, that I find genuinely fascinating.
Why the punitive protectionism, as David puts it?
Well, I think for me, and I would just make the point that David is still rather rotund, so I wouldn't say former fat person, but I think punitive... Chubster, you're going for
chubby.
Chub. You're calling David chubby. OK, that's OK for you to call him chubby. What if I called him chubby? Not so great. But punitive protectionism, I think all I did really, I didn't just write about it either, if I may clarify one point. I put on half my body weight and lost it again to prove that I'm not lucky to be skinny, and to prove that actually if you eat more and move, if you move more and eat less, nearly went the wrong way around there, that you can lose weight. And I would say as well, for our chief medical officer, who has rescued me from a double arm dislocation at one time, she's fantastic, I love her, for her to say that fat people should pay more to fly, that was accepted. I said it a few months earlier on Katie Rules and people were outraged. So it is interesting, this point you make as well, about who has the right to call fat people fat.
Yeah, there are some interesting elisions going on in what you've said. I mean, insofar as, let's say, I'm overweight, but I don't require any extra seating and so on. So you've now conflated what you might describe as morbid obesity, which is a very particular kind of a problem. I have a very close friend who is morbidly obese. It is, without any doubt, linked in his case to depression. There are many, many ways in which depression can show itself, and that's one of the ways in which it does. And in a sense, you're saying that he's absolutely useless and pointless and shouldn't be paid for, etc., doesn't really deal with his circumstances. And you don't have to tell him he's fat, because I can assure you that he absolutely knows. All he sort of really feels under those circumstances is hated. And feeling hated isn't really a particularly good way of getting yourself out of the problem. However, you're hating him for himself and these other people and these people who read you it says volumes, and this is the point I really want to emphasise, about you too. There is something, Katie, that you really cannot bear about the notion of a loss of control.
Can I ask you something?
Of course.
Why is it you tried so hard to lose weight? Why is it that you, for example, perhaps are on a diet now? Why is it you don't want to be large then, if it's not a problem, if no one needs to tell you, if actually fat people are well loved and there's fantastic politicians that used to be fat? I'm not sure how that's relevant, but why is it that you want to lose weight?
No, I'm not sure you were listening carefully enough to what I actually said. I didn't say that there wasn't a problem with being. What I was saying is that people who are morbidly obese or obese, the sort of people who need 2 seats in a plane, know that they are, and therefore just telling them because it's not good for me, it's not healthy.
Let's go back to what David just said about you seeming to demonstrate a fear of loss of control. I mean, it was interesting that when you were not able to appear here, you'd had an epileptic attack in the street. And I read a Guardian article that you'd taken part in, where you said you saw your epilepsy as a failing in you.
Rudson.
But why?
Who I love.
Why would you see your epilepsy as a failing, people overeating as a loss of control, and you fear that?
Oh, of course, and I absolutely group those things together in many ways. One of the things I learned making my fat story was I wasn't able to run, and I wasn't able to work at my normal work rate because I was required to keep relatively immobile in order to keep the calories on. Putting on 4 stone is not insignificant.
But why do you call your epilepsy a failing?
Weakness. Yeah, I call my a weakness and a failure. Absolutely, I would, and I think many epileptics out there would understand that perspective, because I needed to hide it for so much of my life in order to be able to compete at the same level as other people, in order not to give someone a reason not to give me the job, not to employ me. And of course,
would you employ an epileptic?
Would I employ an epileptic? Yes. I'd struggle, because I know how much it can detract from a person.
David, can I just ask you, the bitch of Fleet Street is not an uncommon element of newspaper journalism. Generally, what moral responsibility does a columnist have in the way he or she expresses a view?
There's something very interesting that happens here as well. I mean, if you take, say, my columns, they're written for a demographic which, by and large, is wealthier than the demographic that Katie writes for, and which, therefore, if you go down the Upper East Side at jogging time, you will know, is much more likely to be thin, actually, than Katie's demographic. And yet it's Katie's demographic who are lapping up the pieces
With
about...
respect, my demographic,
nasty...
the Daily Mail Online, is mostly AB readership, so I don't think they're quite so poverty-stricken as one might imagine,
and mine is entirely just about. So probably there are more people who in the position of being overweight who are taking in your stuff, and so in a way it becomes a kind of way of saying, look at them over there and not at me over here. Now, I think there is a moral problem with this. I don't, and of course, being kind of free speech campaign, I'm entirely in favour of Katie's right to say whatever she likes about it and so on. But I would not myself feel comfortable about doing something and saying something to people about something which they probably know, and which is done essentially to make myself feel better, rather than
that's not why I'm doing it at all. If I could
hang
just
on,
say,
Katie,
it's the frustration that no one is saying it.
What moral responsibility do you believe you have? I mean, what you do, it seems, isn't far removed from the cards that were handed out on the tube. Our organisation hates and resents fat people.
It's not far removed.
Leaving recipients in tears.
It's not far removed from that. And in a way, I have said, I have sympathy with someone who found the motivation to do that, because I feel it is my moral responsibility, my moral duty to stand up and say, it is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to be fat in Great Britain. We cannot afford for you to be fat. We cannot afford to pay for your gastric bypass. We cannot afford, or gastric sleeve.
You didn't
we cannot
pay
afford
for it,
to pay for
myself,
your
just to make the
needs.
point.
I cannot afford to pay for all of these things. These people are going to bankrupt our NHS, and we will privatise the NHS because of people who stuff half the fridge in their face.
But Katie, would it make more sense to have a better understanding of what causes obesity than to simply say, I hate fat people?
Well, I think putting on that weight does give you a certain understanding, speaking to the volume of people I've spoken to about their emotional relationship with food. I didn't just sit there and stuff my face with donuts. I went around speaking to people who had always replaced an emotional loss or an emotional issue with food. And all I try and do with my Fat Club, which are now 7,000 strong, some of whom have lost over 6 stone, is help them to replace that with walking 10,000 steps a day.
One last question. The taxi driver who picked you up from the floor when you had your unfortunate accident
of London
was kind to you. Now, kindness doesn't seem to figure somehow in your thinking. It almost seems when we hear you that you've had a humanity bypass. Have you?
No, I'm an extremely kind individual. I love my mankind, but I would love it if mankind were healthier. I would love it instead of eating, you went and took a walk. I'd love it when you hit the next escalator, instead of taking that escalator, you took the stairs. I'd love it if you challenged yourself to get off the bus 1 step early. That's all I'm asking for people, and I don't know why that's unreasonable, and I don't know why nobody in our society is able to say, look, you're fat, you need to do something about it.
Katie Hopkins, David Aronovich, thank you both very much indeed.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.